welcome back to the Earthdawn Survival Guide, the podcast for all disciplines, paths, players, and game masters, with your questers Josh and Dan. I am Dan.
I am Josh.
And on today's podcast, we will be discussing all things acronymical, because I'm not going to talk about the acronym for what we're going to talk about tonight, which is the adventure Terror in the Skies. Best acronym in all of gaming. Going to leave that right where it is. Anyway, I'm done there. If you have any questions for us tonight about what we're going to talk about, please contact us at edsgpodcast@gmail.com.
Before we get into our discussion for the evening, I do want to remind people of FreedoniaCon coming up here the weekend of February 16th through the 18th. Things kind of kick off in the evening, Friday the 16th, with our opening ceremonies and some stuff that goes on that evening. Then a good chunk of the day on Saturday the 17th, as well as a good chunk of the day on Sunday the 18th. We will have panel discussions. We will have online games that you can play with members of both the Earthdawn team for Earthdawn, the 1879 folks, various other things that will be going on. And another reason that I'm mentioning that is that on Sunday, the 18th at 3 p.m. Central Standard Time, we will be doing a live Earthdawn Survival Guide podcast.
As usual.
What was that?
As usual.
As usual. And what we do with those usually is start banking questions so that we have stuff to talk about. So if you have questions about anything Earthdawn related, feel free to caveat. Send them in, and we will hold on to those until that live show. And then that live show will probably go up not that same week, maybe the week after. I don't know. We'll have to look at what our production schedule ends up being a month from now. But that's the situation. So please send in your questions. Give us stuff to talk about.
Because, live, you'll have the answers quicker than hearing them on the audio podcast a week or two later. So
we will still release it on the podcast the way that we normally do. You would not have to come to the live show online in order to get the answers right then. But it would be great if you actually came. For more information on that, come to the FASA official Discord. There's a link in the show notes, and there has been a link in the show notes of every episode of the Earthdawn Survival Guide pretty much since we started.
Absolutely. We'll always have something there. So, initial thoughts on Terror in the Skies, the second adventure we're going to talk about. I'm not sure if it was the second one ever published.
Yes, this is the second adventure that was published.
Cool.
I think similarly to Mists of Betrayal, which we talked about a few weeks back, this is an adventure that was created to try and feature some of the aspects of Earthdawn in the very early days of it. I think, like Mists of Betrayal, it occasionally runs into a couple of places where the mechanical balance of encounters is a little bit off or a little bit difficult based on what the recommended circles are.
Yeah.
But I like it as a story. I think it's got some really interesting setting, like the featured setting of it, which we'll talk about in greater length later, and have actually mentioned in the past, is really, really cool and original. And again, kind of goes against the expectation of your sort of typical fantasy adventure dungeon crawl kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think there is some good opportunity, more opportunity in this one than there was in Mists of Betrayal for role-playing and character development and interactions.
Understood.
And similarly to Mists of Betrayal, it introduces a little something for a notable location in Barsave that doesn't receive a whole lot of development until much later.
Yeah. So this one, as you said, takes place in Travar.
Well, I didn't actually say that, but that's what I was implying.
Yes. So this one starts in Travar. And now that we have a Travar source book, thanks to 4th edition, this ties in nicely, I believe.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that the information that was presented about Travar in this adventure is a like big chunk of what was largely available as far as details about Travar until the Travar sourcebook.
So this had
kind of some of the stuff in that got incorporated into that book so that there would be some sense of continuity there.
Absolutely. So this served as your only Travar available information until the source book came out many years later.
Yeah.
Fair. So as you said, this one is written for 6 to 8 characters again of first, second, or third circle. So that's kind of a big difference of if you have 8 first circle characters or 6 third circle characters, you're dealing with a range of abilities and, as you said, kind of power level for what everybody can actually do. I could see whittling this down. If there was a 4th edition update, would you like narrow the scope down a smidge?
I would just probably look at the stat blocks and difficulty numbers for the opposition and make sure that they were like balanced a little bit better if need be, like adjust the difficulty numbers and target numbers and stuff to be a little bit more appropriate for whatever challenge rating that you were expecting it to be at. Again, I similarly to Mists of Betrayal, I think higher circle characters are a little bit more likely to do well at this because they have more tools at their disposal. But I also think where Mists of Betrayal was the first adventure, it would not strike me as unusual to expect that to perhaps be the first adventure that people had run into.
Yeah.
Similarly to this being another early adventure, it would not surprise me if new characters or relatively inexperienced characters were brought in. One other thing actually that's a little bit different here with the Earth Dawn adventure releases compared to, let's say, D&D or Pathfinder, to kind of use a more modern day, sort of more present day thing, is that it was not uncommon for TSR back in the 90s with D&D to have their adventure modules be a series. Like you would have 2 or 3 or 4 adventure modules that were all kind of
strung
a linked
together.
series of adventures. There were one-offs, like the original Ravenloft was a one-off. But you sort of then have sort of the biggest one of them all, the original Dragonlance adventures. 12 or 14 or 16 modules were in that series overall.
12 or 15, something like that.
Covered all of the span of the books, and like one of the ones that were in there was like more of a tabletop chit war game where you were kind of fighting the actual Battle of the Lance with the different units and whatnot. There really was not anything like that was done with the Earth Dawn adventures. There is no real connection in terms of the officially released adventures that had some kind of ongoing storyline. You had the collections like Thrall Adventures, Parlength Adventures, Skypoint Adventures, where you had like 3 or 4 short adventures that were all kind of linked by the idea that they were happening in the same place. You had Blades, which was an example of here's how you can do a series, a campaign arc that is focused around a magic item. As Lou talked about in the interview that we did with him. And while there were some things that popped up a couple of times as a through line in later adventures, these first 2 don't really have any kind of necessarily ongoing impact on the setting. Which is fine. It just kind of makes it a little bit awkward in one sense, because you've got Mists of Betrayal, which is happening up in sort of the northern and northeast corner of Barsave. And then you've got this adventure, which is happening in Travar and the Thunder Mountains, which are all in southern Barsave. They are about as far apart geographically as you almost can get. I think the intention was not, here is the campaign that we are going to publish for people to play through. It's more like, hey, let's write an adventure featuring certain things, and we'll kind of set it where we want to set it and go from there.
Because these things hadn't been fleshed out with their own source books just yet, because Mists of Betrayal came out before the Bloodwood source book came out. This came out, obviously, well before the Travar source book came out. So these were, I think, little dabbling around into, let's explore this part of the map we didn't do much in the core book with, so we can just flesh it out a little bit and have an adventure around it to make it more exciting than just here's a core book. That's my thought.
Interesting little bit of trivia before we get into other things.
Yeah.
This adventure was written by Shane Lacy Hensley.
Yes.
Who is a pretty well-known name in the industry. He is the CEO of Pinnacle Entertainment Group.
Oh, hi.
He was involved with Deadlands. That's a game that his company put out.
Yeah.
So again, like I talk about how it is a small industry. Yep. He's got quite a number of other like credits and stuff to his name. But that is a name that is probably familiar to folks who might have come up in the later 90s and the early 2000s. Deadlands, Hell on Earth, Lost Colony, Brave New World was also put out by them. Like they worked closely with Alderac. Without going into research, I think probably like Legend of the Five Rings was involved in there somewhere and a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah, there's probably a Wikipedia on Mr. Hensley.
But yes, that is a recognizable name, and it's like Lou said, folks kind of would frequently freelance for each other. They knew each other and were kind of setting things up.
Absolutely.
What a lot of folks did in the 90s sometimes was, well, I've got a game idea that I want to do and put it together, so I'm going to start a company to put it out.
That's how all things start.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I like also the Terror in the Sky starts with a very small short story to kind of give background setting, because Earth Dawn's always been very story heavy, and I appreciate that about Earth Dawn. So Darkness Falls is a short story that's there. I'm not going to get into it. Buy the book, read it, knock yourself out, because it sets up everything for you, and I'm not going to take that away from anybody. But this whole adventure centers on the idea of there are some flying horrors, which are unique to this book, and what they have been doing is terrorizing some shipping lanes in and around Travar, airship shipping lanes. And so the adventurers, at the end of the day, at the end of the entire thing, need to go retrieve an item, a magical spell book called the Tome of Banishment, and use it to banish the horrors outright. That's the entire premise.
Yes. There's a little bit more to it than that, but yes.
That's the 50-word sell. That's it.
That is the surface level of what's going on. And as is the case with a lot of adventures, the group finds out that there is more going on than they thought at the beginning.
As there should be.
So it kind of starts off with the same, you all meet in a bar.
Yeah. Trope.
In this case, the group is having dinner at an inn in Travar for whatever reason that they might be there.
Picky palate. That's fun.
Yep. And there's a thing that happens where a ship that is inbound to Travar has been attacked by these flying horrors.
Yep.
And it turns out that the waitress that is waiting on the player characters, her betrothed, her boyfriend, significant other, whatever.
Fiance,
whatever the relationship is, is on board and is killed as a result of what happens because, with this attack happening, Air Warden Grimsby, who's in charge of like the civil air patrol, essentially, of Travar, comes in and says, hey, we need people to help deal with this. It's coming in. It's been damaged. Things aren't great. And
come help us put out the fires.
The opening encounter involves dealing with the aftermath of this airship crashing into the city.
Yes.
And causing problems, setting some fires, giving player characters a chance to like do some heroics, save some lives, interact with Kathleen, who's the waitress.
Yes.
Coming to Grimsby's attention.
Grimsby.
Right. Sorry, I was thinking of Grimsby. Coming to Grimsby's attention by helping out, doing these heroic acts and whatnot, and essentially getting offered a job working for the air patrol to go out on airships and help escort incoming merchant vessels to deal with the flying horrors, which are called the rakken.
Yes.
And whatever other issues that they might want to deal with.
Yeah.
The early kind of stages of this adventure, like I was saying earlier, there's quite a bit of NPC character interaction role-play kind of stuff that you can do here,
Yes.
because it doesn't assume that the player characters necessarily know how to fly an airship. So there are members of this sort of small airship, this Drakkar, that they are assigned to, that they are able to interact with. And there's some various things that they do. There's like, okay, now we're just kind of killing some time, so let's do some
hull jumping.
Yeah, hull jumping and like gambling and knife throwing contests. And oh, hey, look, it looks like there are these scorchers down there that are causing problems for people. Let's go help them out.
Yeah.
And then, like, after you have this and you build some kind of rapport with Carl and York, is that what they're called?
Correct. York.
Build a relationship with them and kind of forge this relationship and deal with some stuff. Then the next airship is coming in.
Mm-hmm.
This one, we kind of get a little bit of a eyesight of the, a little bit of an overview of some of the sites of Travar.
Yeah.
But then we get the next merchant vessel coming in, and the group is dispatched to go and escort them, and they encounter the rakken.
Yes.
The rakken, which figure very prominently on the cover of this adventure.
Yeah.
Think of kind of like a tapered cylinder, kind of like teardrop shape.
Like a leech. Like a leech.
Kind of leechy, yeah, a little bit. Mm-hmm. But instead of like a leech mouth, where it's kind of like on the bottom, it's got like this big
gaping maw at the end.
Maw full of teeth at the front end.
Yep. The big
little
end.
Beady eyes, big like bat-like kind of wings, and then a couple of like arms that basically end in jet engines.
Yeah.
Their arms kind of have holes at the end that just shoot out fire, and so they are incredibly fast and maneuverable because they can move their arms to change direction really quickly and things like that. The image that comes to mind here actually early on, and I have no idea whether this had any influence on some of the stuff that they were coming up with when they were writing this adventure, is the original Top Gun.
Yeah.
You had the Tomcats, the F-14s, going up against the high-end MiGs, and how those like were presumably faster, more maneuverable, and better fighters. But of course, Maverick wins the day because it's Tom Cruise, and we're Americans, and rah-rah, USA, USA, USA. Not to mention oiled up Val Kilmer on the beach playing volleyball.
Because who couldn't fall for that?
And Kelly McGinnis, was the actress's name?
Kelly McGillis.
McGillis. That was close.
Yes.
Anyway, but that's like the idea is that the player characters are on this Drakkar, which as far as airships go is relatively small and nimble and quick, but they are outclassed by the rakken when it comes to that.
Yeah, because...
So things are complicated by what the rakken do is they fly circles around the group and are trying to set fire to the airship that's coming in.
Yeah.
Because of their maneuverability, it's generally difficult for the player characters to affect them. They've got decent defense ratings and armor and stuff in general. They've got like a physical defense of 12 with 10 points of armor. They are fast, they are physical, they are tough. And there's 2 or 3 of them? Like there aren't very many of them, but but basically the crews of the escort ships as they currently stand don't really have any way of effectively dealing with them. Yeah. They might get some hits in, but generally speaking, once the rakken have caused damage, they cackle madly and fly off.
Exactly.
It's kind of like brutes. They're not super intelligent horrors. They're kind of in a similar class as like Nashers, which is to say they like to wreck stuff.
Yeah, so I can't say it's a mindless beast, but it's pretty much, single directive type beast.
Animal intelligence.
Yeah.
Like it likes to fly around and burn stuff and eat people. It doesn't have any spells. It doesn't really have any actual like traditional horror powers like Horror Mark or anything like that.
Yeah, it's like a construct, not actually Machiavellian type horror that, we talked about in previous episodes.
Yeah. It's a horror. It has karma. It's got a karma step of 12, which is scary.
Nice.
When you add that on top of what it can do already. It's got 3 attacks per round and an attack step of 13. They are nasty.
Yeah, and they're supposed to be.
Unless the player characters kind of get lucky in terms of just like really not defeating them, but just putting up enough of a fight to drive them off and prevent this new ship from getting wrecked.
Yeah.
Then at that point, Grimsby calls them into the office like the next day or the day after and says, hey, I got this letter, which indicates that there was this item called the Tome of Banishment that we might be able to use to get rid of these things. So we don't have to kill them. We just have to get close to them, perform the ritual or whatever we need to do with this book so that we can banish them, and then problem solved. 2 issues. Well, 1 issue, really, and that is that the last place that the book was known to be was in the hands of a windling tribe that retreated into a Kaer prior to the Scourge, and that's probably where the book is.
Yeah.
So, hey, we're going on an expedition. We're going to take your Drakkar. We're going to get on my big ship, and we're going to fly out to the Thunder Mountains. You're going to, like, open up the Kaer, and you're going to go down into it, retrieve the book, and come back, and we'll head back, and we'll deal with the rakken with the book.
Yeah.
Pretty straightforward on the surface.
Yeah, they're kind of baited into going. This anonymous letter.
Here's a problem. Oh, here it's convenient. This wizard knows about this thing that can solve the problem.
Isn't that convenient?
Well, I was going to say, those of you who are familiar with early FASA or late 90s FASA and Shadowrun will know, oh God, this has got to be a setup. Yes. In fact, it is a setup. The wizard in question is in fact possessed by a horror who is interested in the book itself, who wants the book for himself for whatever reasons, mainly probably so he can summon more of these things in and cause havoc, but he isn't able to get into the Kaer to retrieve it himself.
Mm-hmm.
The heroes go in, retrieve the book, he then steals the book from them and cackles madly and goes on to cause untold destruction.
Yeah, sounds right.
Trip from Travar to the mountains, more opportunities for role-playing and semi-random stuff. Kathleen, the waitress from the beginning, comes along because she wants to get revenge for what happened to her fiancé.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so there's maybe this relationship kind of thing that can happen of, oh, she's not really experienced in terms of being an adventurer or a sailor or whatever. Do we encourage her? There is some stuff that's talked about in the adventure with how do the adepts handle this individual in terms of, do they encourage her? Do they discourage her? There is, between her and Carl and York, there are, some really strong NPCs that can show up and be recurring characters in a game that might continue in this area, which you don't have necessarily to the same extent with Mists of Betrayal, because while Mists of Betrayal does have Hierman and Brenula, the 2 NPCs in Haven that you primarily deal with, you don't have the role-playing interaction, ongoing kind of story presence with them that you do with the NPCs in this one.
Yeah.
Then we get to the Kaer. I've been talking a lot. You go ahead and you talk about...
Take the show, man. Go for it. I don't mind. But yeah, you're not wrong. You can also interact with Grimsby a little bit more. You can role play with him. You can interact because you get to meet Juliak Merris in this whole meeting about the letter showing up. He's the one who owned the first ship, the Crimson Dawn, that actually crashed. And so he's funding the second ship that you're going on to go retrieve the book.
It's mildly unfortunate in a sense that what we end up with, because Juliak Merris is an Obsidian merchant in Travar, who is very prominent. And then we get another prominent Travar Obsidian merchant in Omasu. I think, honestly, if I were running this adventure with the plans of doing a long-term
campaign,
Prelude to War arc with the Life Rock Rebellion and all that sort of stuff, is rather than have it be Juliak Merris' ship, have it be Omasu's ship. To have that NPC show up earlier and someone that they start to develop that relationship with.
Yeah.
And I think that was simply because there was not that sense
at the time
that they sort of had Omasu as this basically name in a book attached to a picture. And as Lou said in the interview, oh, this is cool. Well, we'll tie him into this. They could have done the exact same thing with Juliak Merris.
Absolutely.
Prominent Obsidian merchant. They are sort of interchangeable. And I think that, all told, a minor issue. But if
just
you're
change
looking
the owner
at
of the ship, done. That's
as a broader sort of campaign, epic storyline kind of thing, it's probably better if you're going to have it be Omasu, and you should, because Omasu is awesome.
Absolutely.
Have Omasu be the owner of the Obsidian Flyer. I believe that's the name of the ship.
You are correct.
Rather than it be Juliak Merris, who kind of only shows up in this adventure.
Yeah.
He's mentioned in the Travar source book because he's mentioned in this adventure, but it's really Omasu that, if I could sort of retcon things, that's probably the big one that I would do.
He's the star, more so than Juliak Merris character. Yes, absolutely. Because as you get on the Obsidian Flyer, and before you get to the Kaer, you have the Orc Scorchers nearby. So a little taste of combat as well. More, I can say ground combat, but there's the option for Orc Scorchers or which I think really, since you're doing airships, I would change the Orc Scorchers to Troll Raiders.
Possibly. I think part of what is going on here with the Orc Scorchers is that the fight with the rakken is the first real combat of the adventure.
Yeah.
It's a tough fight. It's one that the player characters are, in some ways, like, maybe not intended to lose.
You're supposed to lose.
Yeah. It's not necessarily that they're supposed to lose, but it is supposed to be clear that even if they manage to protect the ship enough, these things are out of their league. Yes. These things are like beyond the capabilities of anybody to really effectively deal with them at this point. And so that is apt to be, especially if things didn't go great and the ship is lost. Mm-hmm. The Scorchers, I think, is supposed to be here is a guilt-free opportunity after that frustrating fight to go in and just kind of stomp some bad guys.
Yes, absolutely.
It breaks up the trip, gives them an opportunity to perhaps further that mentorship relationship possibly with Kathleen. There are some opportunities there that provides to kind of break up the monotony of the travel, provide an opportunity for some like fun,
you can handle this
combat
you can handle
stuff.
This fight.
You can handle this fight because you had a rough fight before. You are going to have rough fights later.
Yes.
Here's a little bit of fun where you can have some characterization development, role-playing, relationship building, whatever with your crew.
Yeah, and your self-esteem boost. As you said, the horrors are supposed to be out of your league, and it's to illustrate that this is how much you need this book. And so after that fight, here's the self-esteem builder, here's the fight you can handle to know the difference between what you can't and what you can and why you need the book. So I see that. So like I said, to update, since we just did all those troll moots, back at episodes ago, I would change this from the Orc Scorchers. Since you're on an airship, why would you land and fight Orc Scorchers? Really, I would just say you have this other airship come in from a certain troll moot, pick one, and do that fight instead, because they will jump on the ship and raid it. So
that's one possibility. Have the raiders, rather than be Scorchers, be Crystal Raiders attacking the same kind of situation, and you have to deal with them instead. Maybe even get a little bit of a preview of the airship combat stuff that becomes kind of important later in the adventure.
Absolutely, because in the back of the Terror in the Skies book are airship combat rules.
The very earliest version of the first edition.
The very one, yes. So then you actually get to Talon Kaer, or Kaer Talon, I forget what.
Talon Kaer, yeah.
Yeah, Talon Kaer. This is of windling design, and there's a map on page 42, and you will exactly understand how different it is from your regular old-fashioned dungeon crawl, that if you've played any of those other games up until this point, this one completely blows your conception of it out of the water.
Well, it's in some ways, yes.
Yes. Because nothing in there is square.
There's that. There's also the fact that it is a Kaer that is designed for windlings. Yeah. And we've kind of talked about this before, how it makes it difficult for most name givers to easily move around within it and to deal with this environment where you've got a population that would not have had any issues whatsoever with being able to fly around. And so it's very vertical in a sense.
Yes.
In that way, like, it's an environment, it is a place, it is an actual place that feels sort of lived in and that it has a history and whatnot. But because of some stuff that sort of came to light recently, I mentioned this is like a completely sort of related but brief sidebar. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, we lost Janelle Jacques.
Yes.
The longtime artist and designer and RPG luminary, really, that had been part of the industry going back to the mid-'70s. Her history in the industry goes back just about as far as anything else.
Yeah, almost to the inception of.
Yeah. She did some art for Earth Dawn, the winning smile picture from first edition.
Yeah.
That's hers. She often brought a certain amount of wit and humor to her stuff.
Yeah.
But she also, like some of her early work for Dungeons and Dragons, it was independently published. It wasn't necessarily through TSR, but was adventure scenarios. And hers were some of the earliest examples of areas that you just kind of go in like hex crawl style, rather than a dungeon like, say, the Tomb of Horrors. You've got an area. There's Dark Tower. There's a classic adventure that was hers. That actually Goodman Games, I think, is doing a re-release of here. I think that's supposed to be coming out this year. But anyway, the idea of the dungeon, quote unquote, as a place, as a sort of living community, that's not something that's new here with this. It just feels like this is more of a hark back to that style rather than perhaps the more traditional, like, steading of the hill giants and those sorts of things.
Agreed. Yeah, because you enter this Kaer in a completely different fashion than I think people are used to. You have to enter it vertically.
Yeah.
Instead of...
You find the door, you open the door, and you find basically that a short way inside the tunnel, there is an elevator that then takes you down the shaft into the Kaer. And of course, because it has been quite some time, the elevator is not in great shape. In fact, it doesn't even really have a floor anymore. You just kind of need to cling on to the metal frame of it. If you put too much weight on it, the rope might snap and send everybody on it plunging down hundreds of feet into like a cistern down below.
I
potentially causes its own problems of, well, how are you going to get back out?
Well, because falling damage is a thing.
Yeah. Fortunately, like the cistern kind of helps, like, because there's water there that is going to lessen things a little bit, but part of the problem is that on the way down, you get attacked by blood bees. This is where they make their first appearance.
Debut. Oh, yeah.
Giant wasps, essentially, that like attach themselves to you, reminiscent of the sturges from Dungeons and Dragons, where they basically latch on and start draining your blood. An individual blood bee is not that bad and probably not much of a challenge for the characters that you would have in this, but there are a lot of them.
It's a swarm, and that's
it is
not
a swarm, and basically the idea is really that you just kind of need to fight them off long enough to get past where they are nesting in the shaft, so that you can get down into the next thing.
Yeah, because I've run this twice, and in the first time, I think I had 2 or 3 orcs on that platform, which is a lot of weight, and the second time there was an Obsidian, which is again by themselves, just a lot of weight on that platform. So that was interesting for me. I've not run it with anybody who's a fleet of foot character. But that was just me. Elsewhere in the Kaer, you will come across a bone shambler, a black mantis, and then eventually you find what's known in the game. Go ahead.
You descend kind of through the residential areas of the Kaer, and there are a bunch of encounters that are not keyed to any particular locations. These are just things like if you take time to explore this section of the Kaer, these are things that might happen. You might meet a bone shambler. Again, first appearance of that. It showed up again in the Parlength box set. Same with the black mantis.
Yes.
Both of those are nasty in their individual ways. The black mantis especially, because of the number of attacks it gets. It's not super tough. Like, its physical defense is 10, but it does have 8 points of armor, and it does a lot of damage when it hits. So
you'll be there a while.
Yeah, it has the potential of causing a lot of problems.
Yeah.
Bone Shambler, likewise. But then, once you're through that, you get down sort of into the lower section of the Kaer.
Yeah.
Depending on the path that you take, you find the secure section of the Kaer, the sort of vault that the book is in.
Yeah.
And sort of the story behind the Kaer that you may sort of figure out as it's going on is that the Kaer was breached.
Yes. Hence the horror constructs inside.
And that one of the windlings took the book and sealed themselves into this vault in order to keep the book from falling into the hands of the horrors. And it was the same horror that possessed the wizard that was trying to get it, and like this is his attempt to go in and get it again.
Yeah.
The vault is sealed by a puzzle, essentially. And that puzzle being sort of a riddle of what you need to be able to do in order to unlock it, I think the phrasing is something like only the purest heart tainted by the darkest evil may pass, or something to that effect.
Like that.
This is where I have kind of, again, this is like one of the things where I think the adventure was trying to highlight certain things.
Mm-hmm.
The adventure presents the solution as somebody needs to get horror marked.
Yes.
That's the solution to the problem, which is kind of rough.
A little bit.
As something that you would just kind of spring on the characters in general. In the overall arc of this, it ends up not being an issue because the horror that marks you is the horror that's after the book, and presumably you are going to deal with it and then no longer be marked.
Yes.
It just strikes me as something that could be a very tough sell for player characters to voluntarily undergo.
Yes.
One of the spellcasters needs to voluntarily cast raw magic in order to become horror marked so that they can open the vault to get this book.
Yes.
I kind of like it as a like dark fantasy. Okay, you're going to need to risk yourself in order to save that. But again, it feels like it would be a very difficult sell to make to player characters.
It feels like the Flash Gordon scene where he's got to stick his hand in that rock with all the holes in it and get bit. Maybe not get bit.
And then, of course, you've also got this weird NPC called the Trader.
Yes.
Which has like a bunch of stuff that you could trade for, a couple of thread items and things that are useful perhaps to get to where they need to go or to get out of the care and stuff like that.
Yeah.
With, of course, if the group kills the Trader, the items then become cursed in one capacity. I know of a time where the alternate solution to breaching the gate was the effect of the curse for having killed the Trader.
Mm-hmm.
I know somebody who had kind of done that situation. Again, it's like a weird little situation. The Trader doesn't talk at all, just kind of indicates what it wants in exchange for whatever it is that the player character wants.
Yeah. It's a lot of interpretation by the player characters. Or the players themselves. But still, again, a lot of opportunity for role playing.
Presuming that the group kind of figures out how to get into the vault, and the adventure doesn't really offer any alternate solutions to the one that they kind of present, which is fine, I guess. And however they manage to get out, the group emerges from the Kaer in time to see the ship that they came on under attack by the other ship. And so this sort of begins the airship combat portion of things.
Yeah.
The idea, and there's a little bit of forcing of the hand here, some additional minions of the horror, Eendwings, which are basically like your little sort of impish flying winged whatever, come across and steal the book.
Yep. Because again, you're supposed to lose the fight to the rakken, and now you're supposed to lose the book.
Yeah, you lose the book, they take the book over to the other ship, and the idea is that basically you have this kind of like air pursuit to catch up and deal with it. Okay, now the big climactic battle is going to happen in the skies near Travar.
Yeah.
Hopefully to stop it before whatever sinister plot is going on is going to happen. And it leads to this tough fight against the crew, quote unquote, of the airship.
Yeah, the Shadow Skulkers, the bad guy's ship.
Yeah, which includes, in addition to the Eendwings, has a bunch of cadaver men. Which we know are, numbers-wise, their stats are not as tough in first edition as they are in later editions.
Yeah.
But they still have the multiple attack on wounds and stuff.
Yep.
You've got a couple of obsidian gargoyles, which are, in their own way, a little bit tougher than the rakken.
Yeah, they're pretty beefy.
Yeah, they don't have the fire stuff, but they do have multiple attacks and pretty decent defense ratings and do a lot of damage when they hit. And then you've got a couple of things called black servitors, which are likewise tough opponents. So you've got a crew of cadaver men plus another 4 tough things to fight against. And then the task is that one of the player character magicians gets a hold of the book and starts casting from a grimoire.
I was going to bring that up.
To banish the horrors.
Yes.
And it is what does it say that it's here? It's a banishment spell with a weaving difficulty of 14, 5 threads, with a casting difficulty of the spell defense of the horror, which is spell defense of 11. So doable, but difficult, because especially if you like weave all the threads, and remember when you're casting from a grimoire, you have higher difficulty numbers that you need to deal with.
Yeah.
And then if you like weave all of those threads, and it's 5 threads, and then you fail casting the spell, you have to go through that entire process all over again.
Yep.
As your allies are sort of doing what they can to keep the bad guys, the minions of the horror, off of you.
Yep.
The numbers are not as out of whack as they were, say, with the Mist fight in Mists of Betrayal.
Mm-hmm.
But there are a lot of enemies that you need to deal with.
Yeah.
And that's a place where, like, larger groups would certainly have more of an advantage.
All right. I was going to say, the group I ran the first time decided to do the hockey goalie strategy, which was they had whoever was casting the spell as the guy in the net, and then everybody else played goalie around them to keep him off so they could get the casting done.
Yeah, it's a tough fight. The fight kind of starts off against the wizard Tyrannosus. He's like a 7th circle Nethermancer, and is a pretty tough opponent. Fortunately, he isn't really able to use any of his horror powers, but if they kill him, then the horror manifests from his body, and you have to deal with
that.
It. Overall, it's a solid adventure. It's got some really interesting locations.
Yes.
Some really good opportunity for character interaction and role play.
Absolutely.
And building relationships with NPCs that could become recurring characters in later games.
Completely.
It's got a relic after a fashion that you recover that could become a plot hook for later adventures. The idea being that there are other horrors that are described in it that you could go after and use the book to banish them.
Yeah, like half a dozen or so.
Unlike Mists of Betrayal, which I think was broken down into 4 sessions, the suggestions for this one are only 2, which strikes me as quite a lot to fit in.
Agreed.
Session 1 is everything up to the arrival at the Kaer, and then the second half is the Kaer and the aftermath.
And the resolution.
You could probably do everything up to the Kaer in a single session without too much difficulty, but I would probably break it up into the Kaer and then the aftermath. Although there's not a lot going on there, the sort of airship chase and battles and stuff that happen is a lot going on, and it just feels like that is a lot to tack on top of. I think a lot of it actually would depend on how much the group explores the Kaer and runs into some of those other encounters.
Agreed.
While there isn't a hard time limit, there is the understanding that the longer they take to do this, the more potential damage can be done to shipping.
Yes, exactly. Because I counted like a total of 8 things as like plot points. The one is the crash. 2 is you learn to fly the airships. 3 is the first fight with Rakken. 4, you
the trip out to the Kaer.
To the Kaer. 5 is maybe the orc scorcher or the troll battle. 6 is you actually get into the Kaer, and there's those things to fight in there. 6B is you find the sanctuary and do the trader thing. 7 is you get out into the last airship battle, and then 8 really is stealing the tome back from the second battle, sorry, and you're in your third battle and do all that. So that's really 8 things to get done. If you do 4 sessions, that's only hitting 2 plot points per, and I'm okay with that. Especially that gives people time to do all the role playing and all the exploration for all the world building you're doing, if this is the first adventure you're running them through.
In terms of an overall story and an overall arc, I really like it. I think there's some cool stuff that goes on here. It's got like a unique location in Talon Kaer. It's got some really interesting opposition in the form of the rakken. What probably feels like a setup right from the beginning.
Yes.
You don't have any other options, so you kind of go after it anyway. I think the weakest portions of it overall are it feels a little bit railroady in the latter half of it.
Yeah.
In order to get the book, you have to do this thing, and then the book gets stolen, so you have to chase after the book.
Yeah.
Those feel a little bit railroady in one sense. Coupled with that is the fact that in that final battle, there are a lot of enemies, and several of them are pretty tough.
Yeah.
So that unless you've got a large group, if you've got a smaller group, you probably will want to just scale back what they are going up against.
Agreed.
I think, especially for like a first circle magician, the difficulty numbers for casting the banishment spell are
a little high.
A little on the high side. 5 threads with a base weaving difficulty of 14.
Yeah.
Even with a optimized spellcaster, if you're looking at somebody who's third circle, you're still only looking at like maybe an 10 or 11 or 12 maybe prior to karma.
Yeah.
For those thread weaving tests.
Mm-hmm. And even
you're going to miss them more frequently than you hit them.
Yeah.
Probably not going to be voluntarily trying for multiple threads. Certainly in first edition, it was more difficult.
Yes.
Because it would be a multiple of the thread difficulty. There's some tough stuff in there numbers-wise, and I kind of understand it like, oh, it's got to be tough in order to take the time and have that kind of dramatic thing going on.
It should be a little difficult.
But it runs into a couple of issues. One, it's essentially taking one of your player characters out of the
fight.
They're still involved in the encounter. They still have something important that they're doing.
Yeah.
But they're out of the fight, so that's reducing the ability for your group to deal with the hazards that are there.
Mm-hmm.
And then the numbers are just a little on the high side, I feel.
Fair.
Just in terms of the overall difficulty. Again, I think probably a higher circle group would fare better.
Yeah.
And there's also the fact that in first edition, there would have been a lot more karma available. Given the time involved, they probably could have full or near full karma pools and have a lot more karma to burn in order to try and get this spell off.
Fair.
The most difficult part of it is weaving the threads, I think.
Yes.
The spell casting, given Raspernor's mystic defense, is not too difficult.
Yeah, it says the 11 versus the 5 14s you need to roll.
Right, exactly. I mean, if you got I think if you get an excellent success on a thread weaving test in first edition, you do weave an additional thread without having had to declare it.
It rang a bell because I think that's what I got them to do the first time.
I don't have a first edition step chart or results chart handy to see what that target number would have been.
I don't either. Mine's not near me.
I know that the excellent success on a difficulty 10 was a 19, so it's going to be higher than that. It's probably going to be in the vicinity of the
2021
mid-20s, roughly 23, 24, 25, something like that, which exploding dice can do a lot of things, but it's probably not something you should bank on.
No.
But again, the idea is you don't necessarily need to kill everything. You just need to cast the spell and banish the horror. Once you've done that, all the other stuff goes away as a threat, and the ship starts to crash, and the group needs to deal with
that.
If they take too long, then the ship is closer to the city and could crash into the city and cause lots of problems.
Yes.
So again, there's a time limit pressure. There's a lot of drama and danger and whatnot involved, and a lot of great imagery and role playing and everything.
It feels almost like an Indiana Jones adventure.
Yeah, overall, this is, I think, a stronger adventure in some respects than Mists of Betrayal is.
Yeah, it's got more settings, so multiple settings. You get Travar, you get the airship, you get the small Drakkar airship, you get the battle on maybe the mountaintop with the trolls or scorchers, you get the Kaer itself, you get the different levels of the Kaer itself. The sanctuary is a whole different thing. Then you get the other
airships,
the bigger
the
airship,
NPCs.
where you can actually fire cannons and the ballista and the whole
I remember that now. Hold on. Let me flip to the info about
this adventure also introduces ship combat and casting from a grimoire that you need to do. So it expands upon the magic rules, or at least forces you into a magic rule that you weren't necessarily maybe willing to do right off the bat as your magic casting character.
Yeah, the Cloud Runner, which is the airship that you take out to Talon Kaer.
Yeah, it's the one you're on.
Looks like it's got a fire cannon on each side and 2 ballista on either side.
Yes. Spear throwers.
The Shadow Skulker, which is the wizard's ship, the horror's ship, does not have any armaments to like fire on the Cloud Runner.
Yeah.
So one of the things that you could have happen is the group takes their airboat, their Drakkar, over to their ship, and they kind of get support from ballistas and fire cannons to kind of help them with the fight. So that's kind of a balancing factor, and you could use that as a dramatic to kind of help balance the encounter one way or the other if things aren't going particularly well.
Exactly. Yeah, so
it's good. I like it.
I've run this twice, and my friend also ran it as well, so I got to play in it once. He rearranged all the aspects of it, so the script didn't come at me the same way I'd run it before. So I've been through this one 3 times and forgot most of it because it was all 15 years ago. And then the treasures in the back as well. There's plenty of treasure for everyone to get. Since we did the treasures in Mists of Betrayal, I mean, these here are also, the Banesword Screech, the Blinding Stones, the Scintillating Medallion, the Servitor Sword, and the Short Sword of Dazzling Speed, the Storm Armor. I mean, you got a trove, something there for just about everybody.
It's a great adventure. And again, I think it's a little bit better balanced than Mists of Betrayal was. But again, being early in the line, I think part of the focus of it was to feature some stuff that is special about Earth Dawn. And again, like Mists of Betrayal, it has a horror as the primary antagonist in a way that doesn't show up quite as often in later adventures. And that's not quite true.
Fair.
I'll walk that back because Infected doesn't, and technically Shattered Pattern doesn't, but Shattered Pattern does involve the Cult of the Great Hunter. Blades certainly does. There are horrors that show up in at least one of the Thrall adventures and in a couple of the Parlainth adventures. I don't think there are any in the Sky Point because that's one that's a lot more dealing with the Theron, Barsavian resistance, rebellion stuff.
Fair. Yeah. No, I think this is a very solid entry, and I think this was also written just after the core book was done, so they had more to work with, versus Mists of Betrayal being co-written at the same time as the core book. So it was what Lou told us in the interview. So
Terror in the Skies is copyright 94, so it would have come out later. Like it was probably, again, like in development or in writing, maybe while the game was being finished up.
Yeah.
But it came out later.
Yeah. So I think this is absolutely solid entry, period. End of story. Like I said, I've run it twice and played in it once. So as far as I can tell, this is my group's favorite one that they've ever been in because it did feature so much stuff to do and learn. You learn airship, you learn casting from a grimoire, you learn ship-to-ship combat. I mean, what's not to love about this one?
Yeah. I don't have anything more to say.
Fair enough. So until next time, folks, go ride the Terror in the Skies for your legend.
Good night, everybody.